Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Alfonso David. I am the president and the CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum. I'm also a civil rights lawyer. Welcome to Paint the Polls Black, which is a voter awareness, voter registration, and voter mobilization initiative. It's being supported by the Sundial Group of companies, which includes Essence, the Global Black Economic Forum, Girls United, Afropunk, Refinery 29, BeautyCon, and the New Voices Foundation. Our goal is to educate, mobilize, and register voters to take action this November and into the future. For some of you who have been with us for the past several weeks, we hosted our first town hall in the beginning of August with Congresswomen Jasmine Crockett and Chantel Brown, Bakari Sellers, Van Lathan, Lene Vinay, and kicking us off for the very first town hall, we had the one and only D. Nice. Tonight, we are hosting our 6th of 8 town halls where we will be focusing on early voting. We are exactly 3 weeks away, or 21 days away, if you like, from Election Day. And we want to walk you through what it means to vote early and why it's important to vote early. A few housekeeping rules. This is a nonpartisan call focused on voter registration and mobilization. Further, this is not a fundraising call. There are many other events that are focused on fundraising. We're here to provide awareness and information for all of you to make sure that you can actively engage in this year's election. We will also be answering your questions. So please put your questions in the chat and we will try to get it to as many questions as we can, as we do every week. Also, there is a link for voter registration. The deadlines in some states have passed, but not all states, and you can still register in some states. If you are registered, also, we're asking you to please make sure that you're still on the roster. You can go to Paint the Polls Black. You can also go to vote.org to make sure that you get information about registration and you can check your registration. Finally, sit back, relax, and enjoy this town hall. Tonight, we are missing our very own Ebony McMorris. She unfortunately can't be with us because she's traveling, but we are going to continue the show as planned. Early voting, as many of you know, think back to 2020. You all remember the vibe 4 years ago. COVID was rampant, but it was so important for so many of us to cast our votes, and we decided that we couldn't, of course, go to the polls in some cases, and we couldn't interact with our family and friends, and we voted by mail. Many of us voted by mail. Early voting had such a renaissance in 2020 that the percentage of people who casted their ballots by mail grew to 46%, more than doubling the number of people who had voted early in 2016. Specifically in 2020, approximately 60% of Democrats, 60, and 32% of Republicans voted by mail. There was a huge increase in 2020. Early voting, as many of us know, is not new. We have been voting early in some format since the founding of our country. And voting has held over, as many of you know, over the course of several days, so that voters in many parts of the country could have ample time to travel to town or certain county courthouses to cast their ballots. But what does it actually mean when we say to vote early? Well, early voting references a few different ways in which you can cast your ballots. You have in-person voting, early voting, as the name suggests. It means that you can go before Election Day and cast your votes at a local polling place. There is also, in addition to in-person early voting, there is also mail-in voting, which is when you submit your ballot via the mail. In some states, anyone can vote via the mail, while in other states, voting by mail is restricted to certain circumstances. We're going to show you a map right now that showcases the differences in early voting throughout the country. The states that are highlighted in the color blue means that all voters in those states have the options to vote early in person and by mail. So where you see all of the blue, if you live in one of those states, you can vote early in person as well as by mail. Now, if you live in the states that are colored yellow, That means that you have the option to vote early in person, but you have to be eligible to vote by mail. And then finally, the states that are in red represent states where there is no option to vote early in person, and to vote by mail, there has to be an eligible reason. So I want to keep that up for just a little while longer. If you look at the blue, you have options to vote early in person and by mail, and is available to all voters. And if you vote early in person, it's available to you if you live in the yellow states. And the red states, unfortunately, early voting is not allowed in those states except under certain circumstances. So now that we understand the landscape, let's talk about who is eligible to vote early, or who has voted early. It's probably the better way to frame it. As of today, more than 5 million people, 5 million, have already cast their votes through the mail or in person nationally. Early voting has already started in many states, although the exact deadlines of when you can request an in-person ballot, must submit a ballot, or when you can start going online differs by state. While in 2020, states made early voting easier because of the pandemic, over the past few years, unfortunately, some states have made it much more difficult to cast your votes early in this election. Throughout tonight, we will be showcasing information and deadlines about when you can vote, and we will also be highlighting the states that each speaker is representing. So for example, I currently live in New York. I'm a New Yorker. So we want to show you this slide that highlights some of the important deadlines to know for those who live in New York. So as you can see, Saturday, October 26th is the last day for voter registration in person or online if you live in New York. And then the last day to request a mail ballot is Saturday, October 26th. And then the deadline for mail ballots to be postmarked is November 5th. The very first day for in-person voting, early voting, is Saturday, October 26th, a few days before Election Day. And then the last day is Sunday, November 3rd. And of course, as we all know, Election Day is on Tuesday, November 5th. So with that, we're going to start with our guests tonight. We have a number of guests that are going to be joining us to talk about early voting. And we want to start with the folks that are from the HBCUs. And specifically, we have joining us for this conversation, we have Tavon Blair, who's the co-founder of XL Leader, and he's also a graduate of Dillard University. We're also pleased to have with us 3 HBCU student ambassadors from across the country. We have Promise Joseph from Claflin University, Scotteria Scott from Tuskegee University, and Anaja Graham from Florida University. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
How are you all doing? Scotteria, we can't see you right now. Why are you hiding from us?
She's coming in. Where she's at? How are you doing tonight?
Keep my video feed back on.
No problem. Take your time. We have some time. I'm doing okay. How are you all doing?
Today's the first day early voting in Georgia, and the lines have been a lot going on. So I'm doing good. I just had to turn around and say I'm going to come back tomorrow and make my plan to go at 7 a.m. instead of going at 11. So I learned my mistake of going to go vote at 11. The line is going to be very, very long. So I have to just do a restart for tomorrow.
So I know that Scotteria is trying to get her video on. While she's doing that, let's talk about early voting. There are many people that are watching and many people who will watch this video after we've concluded. And I want to first talk about, from your perspectives, both of you graduated from or one of you have graduated from HBCU, another is still attending an HBCU. Talk about some of the benefits of early voting that you have seen. And specifically, what I want to get to is in communities that have targeted your Vote HBCU program. Can you talk a little bit about, first, what that program is, and then second, what you have seen in terms of the benefits for early voting? And maybe, Tavon, we can start with you.
Sounds good. So with Vote HBCU, it's a program of Excel Leader. We kicked off this work back in 2020 to educate, mobilize, and empower HBCU students to be informed voters. We just got off our 10-stop tour. We went to Virginia State, Howard University, Tuskegee, Shaw, FAMU, Bethune-Cookman, and we were able to really see the power of HBCU students when they have the ability to lead and when they're able to make their voices heard and not in the space where someone's telling them to go vote for something or to vote for a specific person. This was an opportunity for students to not only lead this effort on their campus, but to come together and mobilize their student community to do this work. And so Excel Leader, we are a community of HBCU alumni who build leaders, impact HBCUs, and change the world. And I'm just honored to have a cohort of 10 fellows. These are just 2 of the 10 fellows that we have that picked up the charge to mobilize their students. We were able to register 859 students on our tour across these 10 schools for 31 days. And Promise, Scoteria, Anijah, they led this effort. We all came to Atlanta this summer. They learned the importance of what disinformation looks like versus misinformation. They learned how policy works, as well as how to register their students to vote. And so that legacy and culture that they were able to build this work off of was able to live on campus and make it live. So that's a bit about us, but the students are the ones who really put this work on and made a shift in how HBCU students consider and see themselves in the voting booth.
Before we hear from Scoteria and Anijah, I want to hear a little bit more about the misinformation that you all are addressing. We are hearing a lot from mass media. We're reading a lot about the misinformation. Talk to me a little bit about what you are seeing on HBCU campuses, how students are responding to misinformation, whether they're able to identify misinformation is something that I think that we're missing. So can you talk to Vaughn a little bit about that? And then I want to ask the other 2 HBCU ambassadors about their experiences.
Yes. So we know that young people, they get their news from different social media outlets. We conducted a survey and we asked them, where do you get your news from? And so some of them said traditional media outlets, but a large majority were speaking about different Instagram platforms, social media, Twitter, TikTok. And we really wanted to highlight and show them how to fact check. And so a lot of those students, they were getting news and they're ready to post it, thinking they're doing informing their students about what's happening and what's going on. But sometimes there's a level of misinformation where there is not too much of an intentional mix of trying to influence people or trying to share wrong information. But there's sometimes where they run into information that is intentionally shown to be shared, which is disinformation. The students have to know when to fact check. So I tell the students, check 3 before you share out. Look for those big outlets that you are a trustworthy outlet that you can inform your students on before you go push this out. And I know Megan Thee Stallion made a good video one day and said, watch out for the folks with the big font, and the white background. Don't be too quick to share those. So those are some of the things, but also with voter registration, students they understand the truth, but there's a missing piece sometimes of the full facts of how to register to vote, understanding that we were encouraging our students to register to vote where you learn. You are a student there for 4 years. And a lot of students were saying that they were always told to submit absentee ballots, but we're not informed what that process looks like. How do I vote by mail? And so oftentimes when students are not encouraged to register to vote where they go to school at, they can possibly miss deadlines. They cannot understand the process of how to complete an application. And so we work with these students. And so we have to inform factual information. And when you inform factual information that's not telling them to vote for a specific person, you allow them to think critically. And so with disinformation, we really try our best to inform them of how to fact check, but also make their own decisions in this process.
So Scoteria, I want to go to you. You're currently at Tuskegee University. You are an HBCU ambassador. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing on your campus right now.
Yes, so thank you again, everyone. I'm Scoteria at the Tuskegee University, and some of the things that I'm seeing is students not understanding why it's so important for them to vote. A lot of students are coming here misinformed, as it was stated before, and they don't have the morale to want to get up and vote or the will to get out and engage their peers to vote. So on my campus, with the Vote HBCU platform, we were able to mix civic engagement and cultural awareness as well. So the students, it was a fun experience for the students, but we also informed and educated them. Regardless of the candidate that they were voting for, we wanted to make sure that they knew who was on the ballot and how the certain policies affect their life. And as it was mentioned, just being at a HBCU in Alabama and being in a rural area is so important for the students to get out and vote, because our last voters turnout was about 17 students went to vote. And we have a voting poll
17 students?
Yes, voted in Macon County. And we're trying to change that this year. We want to shed light on the importance of voting, the importance of being informed about the candidates that you want to vote for, but also having fun with it so that we can show the students that are coming after us that we are the leaders of tomorrow. So we have to make that change, and we have to get out and vote and choose who we want to represent us. That's how we can make our voices be heard.
So when you mentioned before that you're hearing from some students who either are, experiencing apathy or just don't want to vote or don't know why they should vote. Walk us through a little bit again, because this is about sharing information and addressing misinformation. Share with all of the folks that are listening and will watch this, what you are hearing, why people are saying that, especially at this moment in this time.
They feel like their voice don't matter. That's why they don't want to vote. They think that one vote wouldn't matter because of all of the people in the United States. They think that one vote doesn't really determine the candidate, but I just want to say that they're wrong about that, because we've been fighting for our rights to vote forever. And now that we have it, we have to make our voices heard. Like, that's how we pick our leaders, and that's how we see the change that we want to be.
Anasia, how about you? So you're currently at HBCU as well. Talk to us, and you're at Florida University. At FAMU, I should say. Talk to us a little bit about your experience there and what you're hearing on the ground.
Yes, so I'm hearing a little bit of both. I have students, peers who are very excited for the upcoming election, and then we also have, those that are as excited as others. And like Scotteria said, it's just because people aren't aware of the power of their vote. And so thankful to Vote HBCU and Devon, we've been able to increase voter registration for FAMU students. When I was doing my interview process for Vote HBCU, I let Tavon in on that we have a polling precinct here on FAMU's campus, and not many students are aware of that. And so it is one of my goals this upcoming election season to get as many students to utilize that polling precinct, whether that be early voting, in-person voting, day of election voting, but to utilize that precinct, because we don't want that precinct to be taken away. But yeah, there's a little bit of both here on FAMU's campus. Everyone's excited, but we have to push those who aren't as ready for November 5th or October 21st to get out that vote.
What about the climate in Florida? Because many students who are there obviously may not be from Florida. Are you seeing a distinction between the students who are from Florida and the ones who are not from Florida?
Yes. So the students that's here in Florida, we kind of know what we want to do. What do you mean? We have to vote. We kind of know what we want to do. But those students that are we have a lot of out-of-state students here at FAMU. We have Georgia, a different variety of states. However, me personally, when I talk to students and they're pretty really sure on where they want to vote, I ask them, where do you feel comfortable? Do you want to make a difference back at home where you're not currently at? Or do you want to make a difference here in Tallahassee where you'll be for the next 4 or 5 years? And if they say they want to make a difference here, I say, okay, here's a voter registration form, update that registration, then we'll get you updated here into Leon County. But the students that's here in Florida, I personally asked them the same thing. Me personally, I don't vote here in Leon County. I vote back home in Palm Beach County. I request the absentee ballot. But I asked them the same question. Do you want to make a difference here in Leon County, or do you want to make a difference here in Palm Beach County, Miami-Dade? You know, any way we can get students to vote, long as they're voting. To me, you can be voting here in Leon County, Palm Beach County, Sumter. Long as you're voting, that's what I want to make sure happens.
Tavon, I want to go back to you. We started this conversation tonight saying that for all of the speakers, and we'll do this for all of you, we want to highlight where you're from specifically and highlight what the deadlines are for folks, because we think it's actually a really instructive way to identify some of the options that are available and the options that may not be available depending on where you're from. So you are, if I'm not mistaken, you're originally from Illinois, but you currently live in Georgia. Is that right?
That is correct. I'm Chicago.
Okay, so we did our fact checking, so we got that right. So if we were to go to, we're going to pull up a slide right now that highlights what the early voting framework looks like for you if you were in Illinois. And for folks who are watching, you can see what the framework is in Illinois. So you can register to vote. The deadline for registration to vote in Illinois is October 8th. So that is passed. The last day for voter registration online is October 20th. So we have a few days for that. And then the last day for voter registration in person is November 5th. But when we look at early voting and vote by mail, so voting by mail, we still have a few more, 2 weeks or so, October 31st, to request a mail ballot if you're in Illinois. And voting early, the first day to vote early in person was September 26th. So there's been, Illinois provides a fair amount of bandwidth for folks who want to vote early. So that's an example. Tavon, you're from Illinois originally. If we were to flip this and go to the next slide that highlights Georgia, you'll see a radical difference in terms of deadlines and availability, right? So the last day for voter registration in person or online is October 7th. That date is passed. And vote by mail, last day to vote by mail is October 5th. And then early voting, the first day of early voting, as you've mentioned today, Tavon, is today in Georgia. So I want to talk to you now that we've sort of established that foundation of Illinois versus Georgia. You're currently in Georgia. We've been hearing a lot about voter suppression over the past few election cycles. Can you give us a little bit of context, what you're hearing on the ground in Georgia, what people are saying? Are they facing obstacles when they try to vote early in Georgia?
Yeah, so even the way that I introduced this call, I talked about the long lines this morning. In Georgia, we know that our job is to vote. It is to make our voices heard. And we expect lines to be long. And people all over the state of Georgia in different counties, I'm here in DeKalb County, we are keeping an eye about what's happening. And so we have these wristbands that have the voter protection hotlines on there, so people understand if they do run into issues in the polling location, that they are able to call this number to get more support. But on the ground, people are excited, people are energized. We made record numbers today of even by 2 o'clock today, and we hit another 100,000 after 4 p.m. And so Georgians, they know on the local, state, and national level that our voices make impact. And so this is just day one, but I do understand as we go through these different weeks, getting closer to election day, people should make their plans, because if you wait until election day, the lines, I don't even know how long they could be, but it's to ensure that we are in a state where laws have been put in place where you can't give someone water, you can't do certain things that close to a polling location where it's somewhat of illegal. And these laws are new. And so when impact is made through making your voices heard and through this different change that we have here, it is important for Georgians to know that you have to make a plan, because anything can come up. And so just like today, I knew that lines were long. I can say I can go back tomorrow and make my voice heard. But if you wait until election day, you don't have tomorrow. And so on the ground, people are excited and just ready to finally The joke is maybe when I vote, people will stop texting me and calling me. So that is just what people are looking forward to, of just saying that I made my impact, I've done my part, and now it's time for me to text my friends to get them involved in this process too.
So for folks, we just referenced voter suppression, which unfortunately we've seen an increase in over the past few election cycles. For those who confront challenges voting, please, there are many resources available. The Global Black Economic Forum and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, we have a partnership to make sure that folks understand the resources that are available. There's a phone number you can call, is 866-OUR-VOTE. Please make sure if you run into challenges trying to exercise your right to vote, that you call that phone number. There are lawyers that are available. There are poll watchers, and we're hosting a town hall next week that will focus on election protection specifically. But given that we're talking about voter suppression, I want to restate that point so that folks are aware of it. Tavon, anything else that you want to mention on voter protection or voter suppression, I should say, at this point, before I go back to Scott Tiria and Anasia?
The specific thing that I'll add on is for college students. And so we know here in Georgia, if you do not attend a public HBCU, you are not permitted to use your school ID. So that is something to be mindful, that voter ID laws are different here in the state of Georgia, and they may be different for your other states. So if you attend Spelman, Morehouse, and other private schools here in the state of Georgia, you do not gain the same privileges as a Georgia State. But there are schools like Savannah State and Fort Valley that are able to use their school IDs. But just be mindful when you go into these different environments, environments of the polling locations, that those laws are shifted for you, which it should be is that you are a student, they have your information, you should be eligible to vote in these locations. So just be mindful. And so for all my HBCU students, look at those state laws before you go there, understand what voter ID is when you step into these polling locations.
So Scott Tiria, I want to go back to you. As we've mentioned before, you are currently in Alabama at Tuskegee University. I want to put up a slide for folks who are in Alabama. So again, we understand what the laws are in Alabama. So the last day for voter registration, in person or online, and the deadline for registration by mail has to be postmarked by October 21st. So that's in a few days. If you live in Alabama, you have to make sure you register to vote before October 21st. Now, if we're talking about voting by mail, because remember, early voting is unfortunately not available in the same way in Alabama. The last day to request a mail-in ballot is October 29th. And then the deadline for voting, of course, is November 5th. So Scott Tiria, going back to you for a minute and talking, because this conversation is really about early voting, given that folks can't leave their homes to go and vote early the way they're doing currently in Georgia, what is the environment in Alabama? How are people, if those who are excited about this early voting or excited about voting early or excited about whatever the candidate is that they're excited about, how do they express that? How are you guys managing that in Alabama?
Yes, so thank you for that question. So some things that we're doing right now is hosting collaboration events with the Macon County Elections Committee as well. And we're hosting events on campus to get the student body registered before October 21st. So if you are not registered within your hometown, we're encouraging them to either register in Alabama or register, because some deadlines are closed in certain states, but we know October 21st is the hard deadline for Alabama. So our goal is to get students registered, and we have a polling station on campus in Tompkins Ballroom, and it's really close to all of the housing on campus, and it's really close to all of the class buildings, and it's also during our homecoming. So we're kind of streamlining the election day being during homecoming to get the students out and registered to vote, because we know a lot of students aren't going to want to go back home to vote. And we know that a lot of students can't get back home to vote. So we're just trying to provide them with the resources that they need, inform them about the candidates that's on the ballot, inform them about what's going on politically within the state of Alabama, but also telling them to stay informed about what's going on in their home state as well. And we're just making sure that they're educated, registered to vote in Alabama by October 21st, because they can't do early voting. And we're making sure that they know where all of the polling locations are. And we're keeping the morale up by hosting fun events that they can come out and get educated with keynote speakers. We just hosted a Let's Talk About It event where we provided free tacos, and we had a keynote speaker sponsored by Vote HBCU. And we were able to get a lot of students out. I believe we got 90 students out, but we're informing them and having an open mic session to express why they think it's important for their peers to vote, so that they can spread that knowledge. So we're just keeping the morale up in a fun way so that they can know civic engagement is fun.
So I want to ask you a brief question about misinformation, the same question I asked Yvonne. Many of the students, I suspect, are getting their information online on social channels. Can you give us some examples of the misinformation that you're seeing in Alabama?
Yes. So it's a lot of
We have some time.
Right. It's a lot of misinformation going around, especially when it comes to absentee ballots, because I've had so many students come up to me and say, hey, can you give me an absentee ballot? And I'm just like, okay, whoa, I can't give you an absentee ballot. I don't know who told you that, but let me inform you about how you can request an absentee ballot and get it sent back to your hometown before the deadline. Because a lot of students believe that they can come and pick up a ballot, which is okay, but that's why we're here to inform them so that they don't get that misinformation from social media, because they're seeing their peers submit absentee ballots, but they don't know where to get it from. So a lot of things like misinformation like that, they're on TikTok, watching videos, conspiracy theories. It's just so much going on, and you have to steer them away from that. You have to let them know that reality is reality and social media is social media. But if you want to know what's really going on, you have to really be on the real news sites. You have to make sure that your information is backed by people with the credentials to inform you of this.
And Aja, let's go to you. You're in Florida, and I want to pull up a slide right now for folks who are in Florida so they understand what the options are there as well. Monday, October 7th, which is already passed. We talked about this last week. It's the last day for voter registration in person or online. And it was also the deadline for registering by mail. So now we're left with voting by mail for those who are registered in early voting. So the last day to request a mail ballot, as you heard before, you have to request one, is October 24th. And for early voting, the first day of in-person early voting is Saturday, October 26th. Same, if you may remember, we pointed to New York. That is the first day of early voting in New York as well. And of course, then Tuesday, November 5th is the election. So going to you, Anaja, and talking about Florida itself, what are some of the major concerns that you're hearing from students, not only about misinformation, but maybe let's talk briefly about some of the biggest issues that students are flagging for you or raising with you with respect to this election?
Mainly our generation, we're an interesting group. I'm sorry.
You said it.
So it's just the simple fact that we don't go check our information, how we should go and check our information. Oh God, they come with some of the craziest things, the craziest statements. I know like a couple of days ago, actually in class, someone mentioned that they could actually turn in a vote by mail and vote in person. So that's one reason why they don't trust the election. And I'm like, I've never heard of that. And so I previously interned with the Palm Beach County Supervisor of Elections. So I had to go in my bag a little, and I was like, I don't recall, us being able to vote twice. Like, that's not an excuse for you to use to not be wanting to vote, to not want like your vote to count because you think people can vote twice. That is not true, and stop spreading that information. That's not true. And then also students are just really concerned. Like most of them, I noticed when we did our voter registration activation on campus, most students aren't aware that they could literally change their update their voter registration information the day of the election if they cannot make it back home to their specific county to complete their ballots. So that's some information that I'm also trying to get out there to students. What else? Students aren't like on our campus, like I said, students aren't aware that there's a precinct on our campus. So they're concerned about how they're going to be able to get to these precincts to even vote. And so I know our SGA and students around, like student leaders, are trying to encourage students to use our precinct. But mainly a lot of students are really concerned about like the history, like teaching of the history, our history throughout the state of Florida, how we could, it's a whole lot, how things could change here in Florida, the potential of so much going with this election. It's exciting on FAMU's campus, but we're combating a lot of misinformation.
Listen, you touched on something that I wanted to ask you anyway, which is about Black history. Given everything that's happening across the country, we know that Florida has been a hot button, if you will, on this issue. I'll just leave it there. Talk to me a little bit about Black history and how it's being taught at FAMU and what is being taught or not taught in other schools in Florida based on what you know. I'll just leave it there.
I'll just say that I have some professors who don't care, who still go about how they've always lectured their students, how they've always informed their students to make their decisions, who always have, been, those pro-Black teachers who go above and beyond to let us know what our history is. And then you have some of those professors and some of those faculty and staff who are scared, who they would start speaking on some things and they're like, well, I'm not going to go that because I don't know who's recording in our class. I don't know what's going on. So, you have different types of energy happening as it relates to teaching Black history. I know some of my professors they do what they want to do. Then they'll just take it up with the administration later if they do get in trouble, which I like. Me personally, I like, because no one should be telling us, oh, no, we don't want your history to be taught the correct way. We want to water it down and teach it how we want. No, we want the truth, nothing but the truth.
So we're talking about slavery. We're talking about Jim Crow. We're talking about Fannie Lou Hamer. We're talking about James Baldwin. We're talking about Malcolm X. We're talking about barriers that are being created so that we cannot learn our history.
Correct. And you have some who don't care about those barriers. And I hope, we have more professors who are that bold to, stand with students in these fights, because we need those professors who are willing to, push us over the edge. I know some professors here in Tallahassee are waiting for students to make the next move on what we like, the change they want to see here in Tallahassee, whether that be FSU or FAMU. But we need our professors to support us as well. So we like the bold ones.
I want to ask all of you this question, and Tavon, we'll start with you. You're, of course, interfacing with college students, folks that are sort of, in some cases, voting for the first time. If parents are currently watching this, what do you want to say to those parents in communicating with their children, their teens, their college kids about, or young people, about voting this election?
Yes. So a lot of students from the tour that we were able to go on, and a lot of those students were first-time voters. And so the word of advice that I have for those parents to encourage their students to make their voices heard. What we tell our students, to be an HBCU student means to be a registered voter, to be a student that is making their voices heard. And so being at a HBCU, knowing the long history of civic engagement and the fight for our voting rights, those were young people doing that work, that were fighting and making their voices heard across their community and really focused on one single issue, and they all came together. And so the word of advice is to ensure that your students, if you are talking to your son or daughter and you're texting them during their check-ins, ask them, I know you used to call me maybe every day. Now it's gone to once a week. I need to do a check-in to make sure that you are planning to vote, that you are making your voices heard. You will be a student on that campus for the next 4 years. If you decide to go to FAMU Law, you'll stay there for additional 3 years. That is your community. That is your home. And so encourage your students to be vocal about the change that's happening. And so when we talk to our students, let them know that you don't just become active during the presidential cycle. You start on the local level. Understand who's being elected on city council, who's being elected to your mayor, and know that impact you see directly. Everyone's talking about who the next president will be, but you possibly could have ignored the midterm elections, local elections, and that is where change is going to hit you first. The person who is the governor of your state, they have authority of how budgets are created, of how different laws are implemented into your state, how funding is pushed to these schools. So educate your students as they think about going to HBCUs, or if they are currently enrolled at HBCUs, that it is their voice and it is their duty to make their voices heard in communities. So to be HBCU students means to be civically engaged students, and Vote HBCU is here to ensure that students are informed and have the resources they need.
Scott Tyria, how about you? You talk to a lot of students. If you had an opportunity to communicate with their family members, or you had an opportunity to communicate with their parents, what would you say to them?
Yes. So something that I would say to the students' parents is you have the knowledge, so preserve it and share it with the students, because a lot of students are misinformed. And when they are first-time voters, it's very confusing because it's so much information. It's so many steps that you have to take to make sure that you're geared and ready to vote. So I would tell those parents, make sure that you are sharing that knowledge with your kids. Make sure that you are taking them to the polling stations. If they're not ready, if they're not able to vote, show them that you're going to vote. And that's why it's so important, because a lot of students look up to their parents. So they follow what they see. Show your kids why they need to vote and show them that their voices matter. Even if it's just one vote, it matters and it counts.
And Asia, what about you? What would you say to a parent or to a family member, to their son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter, family member?
For me, I would definitely say help your student make a plan to vote. And not just make the plan to vote, but get to that polling place and actually vote. A lot of students may, there's midterms going around right now here at FAMU. A lot of students may be busy with midterms, homecoming is coming up. So make sure you're making a plan and you're actually going to vote. Parents, encourage your students to actually utilize their polling precincts.
Tavon, Scott Tyria, and Naja, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all of the work that you're doing to mobilize young people on college campuses and specifically HBCU campuses around the country. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
And next up, we are excited to bring on some alumni from notable reality television shows. You have seen these folks on your television screens on Survivor, Big Brother, and The Challenge on MTV. But because they're on television doesn't mean that those shows encompass their entire lives, obviously. We're excited to hear from them about their experiences and their thoughts on reality television, but also about the reality of this election and what it means to them and their communities more broadly. We have Michaela Bradshaw, who is known for her appearances on CBS's Survivor and MTV's The Challenge. When she's not living on an island or competing in terrifying challenges, she's a project manager in Texas, helping companies communicate to customers on how they can have a more positive impact on the environment and on society. And we also have Derek Fraser, who is known for being the runner-up for Big Brother season 23, when he's not living in a house with no contact to the outside world or coordinating on the Historic Cookout Alliance. He is the director of enrollment at National University. He's a Philadelphia native, and he's the son of legendary boxer Joe Frazier. He also strives to be a positive role model for Black, LGBTQ+, and size-inclusive communities. please welcome Michaela and Derek to the town hall. How are you all doing?
I'm doing great, Alfonso. Great to meet you, and thanks for having us.
Great to meet you. Derek, how are you doing? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm muted. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting us, and so excited to have this conversation with you guys.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So I want to ask some key questions because I haven't had a chance to talk to you both about your television experiences. And many people know you, of course, from your TV series, whether it be Big Brother or Survivor or The Challenge. And so can you tell us what you remember most about appearing on those television series? And then I'll tie it into the election. But first, let's talk about your experiences there. And maybe we'll start with you, Michaela.
Yeah, I'll definitely say one of the key experiences being on Survivor is just realizing that it's not all about what I want as an individual or how I perceive things or my vision. It's understanding what's happening around me and realizing that there's a broader context to everything. And my own desire is one thing, but how to make sure that anything I'm doing is able to push, basically how to make sure that anything that I want to get done can be sold, or I can influence other people in the same way. Like mobilizing other people is just as important as being very committed to what I want to see done. That's one thing that I realize is very important. You know, in Survivor, I had the opportunity to play that game back to back twice, which not many people get the chance to do. And that was a big thing that made the difference between me going out halfway and me getting 3 days from $1 million, was just realizing that what's in other people's minds and what's on other people's agenda is important. And me finding a way to play into that or influence that is what can get me, you know, from halfway through the game to the end of the game is very important.
What about you, Derek? What can you tell us about what you remember most about appearing on television?
I'm going to kind of piggyback a little bit off of Michaela. Definitely influence a lot, comes into play when you're playing this game, any of these reality shows. And I will say just understanding how people think and how you may be perceived to them or what they're thinking is so important. So Michaela kind of stole my answer a little bit. And I'm going to just piggyback off of her, but it does play into key to where we're at now as we get into this powerful conversation of election, you know, having these conversations with other people. And Big Brother's the same thing. We really had to base our game on conversation and relationship. So it depends on how you influence them and what get them to do what you want them to do in order for you to get further. And that's just how the world is too. Look at our election and how it is.
Let's get to the election. So, Michaela, you are currently in Texas, and I want to put up on the screen, we have some slides for each and every speaker tonight. We wanted to reference where they are, where they live, and what the deadlines are for this election. So the deadline for registration in Texas has passed. October 7th was the last day to register in person and was the deadline for registration by mail. So Texas does allow vote by mail and early voting. So vote by mail begins on October 25th, and then early voting is October 21st. And then, of course, election is November 5th. So just speaking about this election, and you mentioned briefly what you learned from the series, tell us a little bit about, given this election and where we are 20 plus days before the election, how your experience from appearing on television in a competitive environment applies to this specific election cycle.
Yeah, definitely. I would say in my experiences, both on Survivor and The Challenge, I realized that every single vote matters. The worst thing you could do is assume that because things went well yesterday or last week or last month, that things are well today. Things change on a day-to-day basis, and you have to be constantly making sure that the things that you stand for and the things that you want to happen, that you're actively moving the needle towards them. So in terms of voting, that means you yourself making a plan to get to the polls and early, not on election day, right? You can vote anywhere. when you do early voting, you have to vote at your designated election location on election day, right? That might mean lines, that might mean traffic, that might mean a lot of extra things that you don't want to have to deal with. So just ensuring that you don't get comfortable is the important thing, and saying, hey, number one, I need to take care of myself. And the next thing, I need to take care of my alliance, right? What is the broader goal? Who are the people I need to try to activate, mobilize, influence to take action? And those are the things we need to keep top of mind when we think about this election season.
And Derek, you are currently, I believe, you're from Philadelphia, so we'll look at the slide from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So for folks who are in Pennsylvania, which is a swing state, Monday, October 21st, which is in a few days, is the deadline for voter registration in person or online, and as well as the deadline for registration by mail. Pennsylvania provides the ability to vote by mail as well as early voting. So the deadline for voting by mail is, the deadline for requesting a ballot, is October 29th. And then early voting began on September 16th. So folks can already vote early in Pennsylvania, which is a swing state again. Derek, going back to you and your experiences on reality television and how this actually applies to this election, can you connect the dots for us and what you learned on television and how this applies to the election for you?
I will say this. The one thing that's very important when it comes to this election is that, like you said, the main thing you said was swing. It is a swing state. So just like when you're doing these competition shows, you have to keep having these conversations with these players. You have to keep reassuring that, hey, you're voting my way, right? We're going this way. Those things are so important, because sometimes you might think, okay, it's all good. I don't have to have a conversation with so-and-so. They're all good. They're going to vote the way that everybody else is going to vote. No, it doesn't work that way. And if you think about this election, take Pennsylvania, for example, it's a swing state. You have to keep having conversations with the people around you, the people that are in your community, the people that you care about. And it's important to vote. No matter who you're voting for, it's important to vote. So that's why when you do these competition shows, it plays into key of making sure you have conversations. I know I didn't have a conversation with a person, and come to find out that person voted against me, and I had to have that awkward conversation of, oh, you voted against me. And I'm still here, but you voted against me. And that's why you have to make sure when it's unsure, like, have these conversations, get yourself registered, get yourself, if you're going to vote early. Why not? Get it done. These things are important. The things that play into key, just like we were talking about, Michaela was talking about, sometimes there could be lines, there could be issues, there could be, traffic, so much. So it's like, if you can get it done, get it done.
Now, let's talk a little bit. You both referenced this, and I want to really tease out what you're hearing from your colleagues, what you're hearing from your friends. Michaela, talk to me a little bit about what your friends and your colleagues are raising with you about this election.
Yeah, honestly, I hear that a lot of people are just tired. There's so many things happening. People are feeling apathetic. People are feeling like they're choosing between options that maybe wouldn't be their preference to begin with. And I feel like I can speak for a lot of millennials who are in this 30-ish space, and there's such a temptation just to worry about me and my house at this point. And while I do believe that the local elections are where we feel the deepest impact, and we really need to be engaged, and we really need to galvanize around that. At the end of the day, when we think about the head of this country, that's what represents us on a global scale. And that's what will set the trajectory of the things we'll experience as a whole over the next 4 years or so, right? So really, it's a big push to get people out of this space of being overwhelmed, tired, stretched thin, focused on their own pocket, and focused on their own, box of the world, and just recognize that this is a time where we need to engage, be active, and major in the majors. And so that's really the thing right now. It's just getting people to regardless of what they want to choose from versus what they have on the table right now, just knowing that this is an important decision and letting this be a springboard to say, hey, if you don't like your options today, think about what you do to make sure you have options you want in 2028 and how to start that process right now.
So, Michaela, how are you convincing your friends or engaging with your friends on not thinking about these issues myopically? Because I think that's absolutely right. We're moving closer and closer to an environment where people are only seeing the election through a certain lens. So maybe it's only on an issue, or maybe about an individual. How are you having those conversations? And I assume those conversations may be difficult.
Yeah, I would say I would say slowly but surely. It's figuring out what's important to each individual person. And again, I find value in talking about it at the community level and saying, all right, well, what do we need to do on the local level so that we can make a bigger impact broadly, right? Because I feel like the challenge is sometimes people feel like, this thing is so out of my vote doesn't make a difference. That person doesn't know me, won't do anything for me. And so sometimes just drawing the attention back to, okay, what is important for you today? And who is the person that actually can make those decisions? Were you engaged in that election process? Right. And if not, let's change that. But this one is the one you have today, right? So let's start that trend there. So it's just finding that one thing that matters and encouraging people to take the action that's available to them right now. We can't control the things that we cannot control, but we should take action on the things that are in our realm of control. So I think that's my main option right now. Some encouragement, positivity, and push to action.
Derek, how about you? As you talk to your friends and your colleagues, what are the issues that they're raising most often? You mentioned earlier that you want to have these conversations now because you may find out later that someone is voting against your individual interests.
Yeah.
How do you get to that place where you're shifting it from the individual to the community within your circles? And then more specifically, what are the issues that people are raising with you?
Yeah. I really want to tackle this from a point of having conversations, as you mentioned before. And I said, I have made sure in my circle, my people, my family, my friends, everyone around, we're having conversations about what's happening, what's best for myself, but also what's best for you. And hopefully if we're all on the same page, great. But there are going to be times, just like Big Brother, people are not going to be on the same page with you. And you just have to have those open conversations. I will say this, I'm going to take an example, and I'm not throwing anyone's business out there. I had a conversation with a gentleman who I really was like really close with. And, when we had a conversation and I found out he was the opposite of me, it kind of took me back. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? I wasn't expecting this from you. And we had a very adult conversation, but I had to also if you're my friend, I just wanted you to understand, number one, I'm a Black man. Number two, I'm a gay man. Number three, I grew up in a single parent home. There's a lot that comes with it. And when we had this conversation, just like Big Brother, I just wanted him, I'm not trying to say what I want you to do, but I also just want you to understand where you're voting is really against me as a person. And I had to help him understand that. And this is all about conversation. Just like in Big Brother, you have to sit there and have conversations with people, and these competition shows in general, you have to have these uncomfortable conversations in order for people to understand awareness. But even if that person's not going the way that I want to go, or people around me want to go, I want them to still understand you still have a voice and what's important. And this is important for the future. So just having conversations is the most important thing, but they are going to get uncomfortable. And we have these conversations sometimes with people, we might have just stabbed them in the back. Literally just stabbed them in the back, and they're back, and you're like, hey, you're
but
here.
I need you still.
I still need you, but listen, this is what happened.
We together.
And the same thing's going to happen with this election. Somebody's going to lose, somebody's going to win. But at the end of the day, we have to understand that us as America have to work together. And this divide that we're having it's just getting bigger and bigger every year. And we need to come to a place where we can work together, because no matter who's sitting in that seat, we still have more opportunities. We have Congress, we have local, we have other things that we can control that can at least help some of us. So don't think about the big person, the head honcho. Also think about the people around you, the people in local.
Yeah, and the people that actually cast the vote for the president, which is not us as Americans.
Yeah.
But anywho.
What has surprised you the most in having these conversations with friends and colleagues? We've heard things like, reproductive justice and the cost of food, housing, certainly, gun violence prevention. We've heard some of those issues have been, based on polling, to be some of the top concerns among Black people here in the United States. We've also heard about increasing political attacks against inclusion and diversity and economic opportunity. What has surprised you the most in these conversations with colleagues and friends where you've seen a disconnect?
I can say, as someone who works in the program management space in corporate America, there's a DEI component to what I do. How many general Americans just do not realize that this country has been established formally since 1776. So we've had about a little less than 250 years as a country. We had slavery for a chunk of that time, like 100 years of that time. So we've only had about 150 years of saying Black people are actually humans. Black people are not cattle or property or something like that. Like, people with melanin are actually human beings. And then beyond the point of being human beings, we've only had about 60 years since the Civil Rights Act of saying, you know what, Black people are not only human beings, but deserve to have equal protection under the law and equal rights under the law. And there are people right now leading departments, leading initiative companies that are 60 years or under, and they have no idea that in just their lifespan, rights for Black people are just that new, right, in this country. So that's the scary thing to me about this attack on DEI and those type of initiatives. It was only when the federal government started creating these types of laws, regulations, checks and balances to say, you know what, we have to treat people as equal. That was the catalyst to us having opportunity. Right. So now that there's this repeal on things, the fact that people don't understand that we're going back to a place where things weren't equal, where there was an opportunity for all, right? Where the Constitution did not apply to every American, right? That's the scary part. And the fact that just people are not educated to speak about these things and don't feel confident speaking about these things. There's DEI departments, but the people inside them can't take a stand and say, this is why we do this. This is why this is important. It's gone to this. It feels good and we should. And it's like, no, there's a business value to this. And there's a true value to this beyond how you personally think and feel. Right? That's the interesting thing, but also that's the exciting thing for me, is to be able to say, hey, I can educate myself and I can be the person in those rooms and I can be the one to start those conversations. And I can also be compassionate and intentional and leverage my relationships with people so that conversation is not harsh or pushy or abrasive, but it's one that really comes from my heart as a person. And so that other person who thought that DEI stood for, what did they say, didn't earn it, right? The folks that think that that's the acronym for DEI, we can talk about that and how do we get here and how unfortunate it is that they think that way and what can we do moving forward, right? So that's an interesting thing to me, but anyway, I can talk about that all day. Derek?
No, Michaela, I also want to piggyback off what you said. Don't forget about women couldn't vote too. So don't forget.
I know, right?
So that's another part of, where we're at with these 100 years of us getting into this. It is very interesting to see where we're at, but I do agree with Michaela. I know I talked about friends and family business-wise, luckily, place I work, I will say I feel like it is we're all on the same page, if that makes sense. And luckily, when we do have those conversations, I've never had to deal with the awkward part of being on opposite ends and things like that. Now, when I used to work as a director at a military school, that was completely different. I was definitely kind of on my own island, but I still made sure to have those conversations because it's important to understand what somebody else is thinking and what their reason is. Because even when you take all these competition shows into play, we also have to understand what are you thinking, where are you going, and why are you doing this, so you can understand and then see how you can come to a common ground. Or guess what? You might not ever come to a common ground, and that's okay. But when it comes to the world of politics and where we're at, like Michaela was saying, we're getting back to the point of we're going backwards. We're definitely heading in the backwards way, and then nobody is seeing it. And I know we get distracted by social media and all these other things and all these crazy things, but this is important because for me, I don't know what it is, but with this election alone, this really feels like either we're going to make it or we're going to break. We're going to fully break if we don't get this together. And that's the scary part that we live in. That's why it's important to vote. I know some people sit there and think, oh, I ain't got to worry about it. There's enough people, or I'll get it next time, or, no, every vote counts and we have to do it.
Derek, why do you say that you think that it's either make or break for this election? Because the pundits sometimes say that for every election. Why, for you, do you feel that this election is a make or break?
I would say this, being an African American, male, being a gay male at that, a lot of the policies, and I will say this, on the side that is on the other side, are not for me. And there's a lot of us. And, I grew up in a single parent home. I grew up in, trying to find out where my next meal's coming sometimes. Also trying to find out exactly what's, where's our next roof going to be sometimes. That happens. And I believe in always helping one of the other, helping one of each other. Another thing is that if you think about women's right, we're talking about telling women what to do with their bodies. Like, that stuff is crazy to me. We're going backwards. So it's like, I can't imagine if we put somebody into play, and I'm going to speak freely, a criminal into play. Okay. We're putting a criminal into play plus everything else, and then expect everything to be hunky-dory and everything's going to be okay. I don't see that happening. I see chaos. I see a lot of people like me that look like me, that come from the same community of me, women like Michaela and the rest of them. I see them also having issues and problems. It just doesn't feel right. Usually some elections, it's like, okay, it happened. It's okay. We'll take the loss. We'll try to get through this. But for some reason, this one feels like make it or break it because we saw what happened before. That's what makes no sense to me. We saw it happen before. And then us as America, what the issue is and the problem that I also see, if this man's able to be a criminal, okay, and run for president at this point, basically everybody who's a criminal in the prison can run for any type of position they want at this point. And I feel like there should be rules and regulations. And then I feel like also when it comes to the court system, we twist and bend rules and make things certain way. Like, it's just, it's not good. We need to really clean it up. Because right now, us as America, everybody in the world is laughing at us. And they think, I know me and Kayla played on a reality show, but they think America is a reality show. Okay, they think it's a reality show and they're laughing at us, and we're over here like, we're not a reality show. This is our real life. But the way everything's going, it seems that way.
Kayla, what about you? What are your sentiments on this year's election, and what does this mean for you personally?
Yeah, I think the quote, united we stand, divided we fall, comes into play a lot. When you have a campaign that pushes division and separation and distinction between this group and that group constantly. I think it is, it doesn't bode well for the majority, right? And the majority is the American people, any way you split it. So, you know, again, like I said, we've seen one of our candidates come into power, and we've seen the chaos of them exiting power, right? We've heard comments of, you know, if I'm in there, you won't have to worry about reelecting me again. We hear a lot of things that are not in alignment with democracy and peaceful transitions of power. And we've also seen a lot of bad behaviors being condoned, being swept under the rug, being turned a blind eye to. And so if for nothing else, at this point, it's like we want to go the way of peace, if nothing else. We want to go the way of peace. And then we want to say, okay, again, if we don't like the options that we see today, what do we need to do starting at the local level to create some accountability to get the right people in the pipeline for the head of this country for the future? But as for now, we want to make sure that the person who ends up in that position of guiding this country, while they're not going to be making the laws per se, right, but they will be representing the United States global front. They will have the, you know, power of veto and signing things into law, right? We want to make sure that that person is not setting us back and repealing the things that due process has already put forward for this country. So that's what I say why this is such a big deal. It's the opportunity to have the opportunity to change things for the future versus going back to something that we know was chaotic and was not peaceful for the majority of Americans.
So in addition to talking about voting and its importance, tonight we are talking about early voting specifically. So I would like for you both to leave us with your message that you want to share to all of the voters out there who are considering whether or not to vote, and more importantly, or just as important, whether or not to vote early. Can you, and maybe we'll start with you, Derek, to talk, what is your message to the folks out there about why they should vote early, and how are you going to encourage them and your friends to vote early as well?
Yeah. I would leave it with this. It is so important to vote. If you have the means to vote early, so you don't have to worry about waiting in a line, maybe a longer line, dealing with traffic. You never know what can happen. Something can happen and you could be like, I can't make it. At least get it done so it's done. And this also will allow us to know where we're at, okay, and what we need to do to whatever side you're on to win, okay? Another thing I will say, voting, even if you vote early, you vote later, your vote matters, okay? The one thing I would learn, and Michaela will agree with this, on Survivor, you don't want to lose your vote because it matters, okay? But it is important because even if you're someone who's like, I'm good, because, you know, a lot of us now in America, we just push things off. You know, that's why we, you know, just like Michaela said, it's important to get the people in the local. If we don't want these candidates, we got to get more people up there to run or have more changes so we can get more people for options. But it is important to vote because think about, if you're not thinking about yourself, think about someone that you know, someone you care about, a mother, a father, a son, a best friend, a cousin, anybody. Think about them and why it's important to vote. Whatever your reasons are, make sure you vote.
Michaela, you have the last word.
Yeah, and I would say if you're thinking about why it is important for you to vote, I want you to just go to YouTube and type in Fannie Lou Hamer, Democratic Convention 1964, and listen to the most dramatic 4 minutes of your life, of the experience that someone went through in 1964 just because she chose to vote. That's your reason why you need to do it, because that was the experience that Black people in this country for many years to give you this opportunity. So that's your why. And then your what and your how, that's where the early voting piece comes in. We're busy, we have families. I don't have kids, but some of y'all have kids, right? Most of us have jobs. I have one. We've got bills to pay. We've got things to do. So many things are going to take place on election day. You don't want to stress yourself, right? I'll tell you, being in Texas and in Dallas, sometimes they make it so hard to figure out who all is on the ballot, what all we have access to vote for. So go ahead and walk in there, look at the ballot, walk away, and do your research. And then go back in when you're ready and make your intentional selections. So your why is Fannie Lou Hamer, period, point blank, right? And if you listen to her story, you'll feel very compelled. And then early voting is just going to make sense. It's going to give you the chance to establish your ballot, go anywhere that's convenient for you, regardless of where your voting location is, and then get it done so you don't have to rush on actual election day.
Michaela, thank you. Derek, thank you for spending some time with us tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you for your words.
Thank you.
To all of our speakers, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope that for all of you who've been watching, you have more information. We hope that you have registered to vote. There are some states where you can still register to vote, and we hope that you vote. We say this every week, and we think it's worth saying. You just heard the reference to Fannie Lou Hamer. If you have not seen the YouTube video, you should watch it. Our right to vote is sacred, and our ancestors died for our right to exercise this right to vote. And I often say that if you don't exercise your right to vote, someone else is going to be voting away your interests. So we hope that this series continues to serve as a meaningful resource for all of you. I want to once again thank the Sundial Group of companies, and that includes Essence and the Global Black Economic Forum, Girls United, Afropunk, Refinery 29, BeautyCon, and the New Voices Foundation for continuing to support this town hall. This is the 6th of 8 town halls that we are going to be hosting. We will have another town hall next week that will be focused on election protection. What we mean by that is when you show up at the ballot box and you face obstacles, what do you do? Please tune in next week, and we're going to have some experts who will walk us through all of the resources that are available. And in the interim, please visit paintthepolls.com. Please visit Essence, the Global Black Economic Forum. We have a lot of information that's available for you. Go to vote.org as well if you have not registered to vote. Thank you again for joining us.